Welcome to MtgCubeTuber, the podcast where we discuss all things magic, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. Uber Bear, and his partner in crime,
Just Stu.
And today, besides Just Stu, we're joined by a very special guest, May, who has the Fae Cube, and I'm going to let her tell you all about this awesome cube that we're going to be covering today.
Absolutely. First of all, I would also like to say welcome to May. It is our honor and pleasure to have you on this episode, and we're super excited to hear about this cube. You know, the design process, the chosen archetypes, the whole 9 yards. We've spent some time reviewing it, looking over all the card choices and everything. And in Anthony's words, I would draft the heck out of this cube.
I would. May, would you mind doing a little brief introduction before we get into the libations portion of the pod?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm May. I'm happy to be here. You might also know me as Myagic, Myagic on Twitter. I focus a lot on my Fae Cube. I have a few other cubes, but like my Fae Cube's my pride and joy. So
nice.
As you can see, looks awesome.
I do pack one, pick ones basically daily. There's been like a couple days I've skipped, but basically daily. I tend to update my cube pretty often, a little bit more than I should. A lot of the things that I sat down and thought about was I wanted to make low power kind of budget and flavor, and people just started to really like it, so I started doing it more.
I love it. You know, the first thing I noticed is before we move into our little, we got to have our drinks, right? But the first thing that I noticed that you made me think of when I saw this was the island of misfit toys. You brought me back to my childhood. And I know you were doing a fantasy genre. I get that. But you have to realize that you took me to Rudolph. I'm picturing the locomotive with square wheels and the boat that don't float and all those things. That's why I have problems.
80s cartoon. There's an 80s cartoon reference.
It's 100%. You took me back to my 1980s childhood. But anyways, we're going to carry on with the topic. But before we do that, we're going to do the thing that we do always here at MtgCube, is we're going to have our drink of choice. And we're going to ask that our special guest first introduce her drink that she's enjoying for this pod.
Sure. So I made myself a little whiskey sour here. It's kind of like a pink whiskey sour. I threw in some lemon juice, some pink lemonade, some American honey whiskey, and then I put in, of course, some maple syrup, and then just gave it a good shake.
That sounds
sounds delicious. We actually had something similar to that last night. We had a buddy of ours come over last night. We did some cubing, and he brought over it's Four Roses, which is not my favorite bourbon in the world, but he brought mixers with it. And I was like, sigh.
You don't do that.
You don't do that.
Why don't you? Yeah, but
and
why don't you?
He told me just to shut up, get out of his way, let me make the drink. Do you want a drink? And I was like, yeah, I guess. So he made basically so the recipe was pretty nutty, but he basically used some country time lemonade, and I'm like, oh my God, what is he doing to this bourbon? And it was delicious. It was like a whiskey sour, and I would say that my buddy Christian, who's sitting behind me hiding in the background, he and I, by the second pick of the draft, we were feeling like lemonade and whiskey. So I don't know how well it's going, but it's a thing.
So your standard of drafting was improved.
It's a standard. I do like. So I myself I'm having a terrapin. It's out of Athens, Georgia, and I'm having their luau passion fruit orange guava IPA. That is a lot of nonsense inside of a can.
A lot of words. I got me a Highland Brewing.
A lot of words.
Yeah, a lot of words, which is not necessarily a bad thing on a magic card, but with a beer. I got a Highland Brewing. It's a seasonal peachful, fresh and fruity ale. And
all right, let's go. I'm going to pop this open.
Go ahead.
Sweet. All right, cool. Let's give this a taste.
All right, so let's get into the meat and the bones. Not that there's any giants in this, but So again, as you were discussing, as far as the themes of this cube, right? It's a Fae Cube, fairy creatures, mythical creature kind of things, right? We had a few creatures and sort of signature cards that we'd looked at when we'd gone through the list and gone through some pick one, pack ones, that kind of stuff. And we wanted to look at some of the key creatures that really do just an amazing job of representing the tribes in the cube, right? I'm going to talk about the first one, Battle Cry Goblin, right? Goblin's obviously a big part of the cube. This is an absolute monster, and especially anything that's pretty efficient. And when I say pretty, I mean very efficient. 1 colorless, 1 red gives you a goblin, and then for 1 colorless, 1 red, it pumps your goblins by +1/+0 and gives them haste and And because I like cards that I can say
And it's uncommon before we say any more ands. Keep going.
And
Power push, much.
This is a cool keyword that I wasn't aware of before, which is pack tactic. So whenever it attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater, this combat, you get another 1/1 red goblin that's not just coming in, it's coming in tapped and it's coming in attacking. I don't really know if I really need to ask a whole lot more explanation, but I'd like to hear you talk about it because this card is just, it's monstrous.
Absolutely. So goblins are one of like my favorite tribes, so I've kind of had to
Oh, I was going to ask you that.
moderate myself on how strong can I make this goblin package so I want to play it, but not so much that it's the most dominant type. Like I ended up cutting a ringleader because with that whole package, it was just too stupid, but he's probably going to go back in.
Right.
But specifically with Battlecry Goblin, he has a very cool role of instead of just playing him as a bear, which you can, I actually prefer to play him as a 4-drop. So that way he's just a 3/2 that comes in with another token attacking, and it's just a big blowout on turn 4, which is what aggro is looking to do.
I was going to ask you, and you kind of answered in that. I was going to ask you, put you on the spot, but you did it for me. I was going to make you choose your favorite child out of this entire cube. Your favorite tribe, their favorite child, and see, because nobody, I'm a parent, and Stu's a parent, and the one thing you never do as a parent, tell another child, at least in front of them, that you're my favorite. And
I would never do that.
No, but you have identified
child.
the ones that will help you with the retirement and the one that's going to be like, whatever, never visit dad again. But Battlecry Goblin, do you have a favorite goblin in your cube? And I'm going to...
Ooh, that's a good question. So I recently, semi-recently, there's a lot of it's that happened. I put in Ib Halfheart Goblin Tactician.
Oh my god, I love that card. I did, I saw that. You made me get giddy.
This card is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It is a 3 in a red, legendary creature, Goblin Advisor. Whenever another goblin you control becomes blocked, sacrifice it. If you do, it deals 4 damage to each creature blocking it, which, that's turning your goblins into pseudo-death touch is amazing.
It's insane.
But the part that makes it my favorite is the sacrifice 2 mountains, put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens into play.
Nice. So the one thing that we did is we just jumped right in the goblins. We were super excited to talk about this goblins, but would you mind covering, because we do this a lot. We jump the shark, we have the drinks. What kind of tribes do you support in your cube? What's the overlay here? What are we looking for?
Okay, so there are 7 major supported tribes, and there is 5 major classes. So like they're sub-tribe, they're whatever, So we have goblins, we have elves, we have fairies, we have dragons, then we have humans, and then we have wolves, and then why am I spacing the other one?
Changelings. That's always the filler, changelings.
Changelings, yeah, thank you.
They're the everything tribe.
Yeah.
Do you know?
They are the everything tribe.
Yeah. And another thing that, I'm going to continue to tell you, like, I already gave this whole spiel about, you made me think of Rudolph when I saw your cube. But aside from that, right? The other thing that's so kindred to me personally about this cube, and I don't know if you're familiar, I have a horror genre cube. I do tribes.
I'm aware. I've seen it.
Yeah. So I'm doing a tribal thing too. And the one thing that I chose to omit from that cube, and it's only because I didn't need it for the type of cube I was doing. They were so prevalent. Like I'm doing zombies and I'm doing vampires and all the things, right? Werewolves and whatever. Is I didn't have to use we'll call it the changeling glue. In my drafts today, and I did a couple of drafts today, and we'll talk about those shortly, but the one thing that I love so much about your cube is if I was faltering in the draft, or if I felt like I wasn't getting the pieces to come together, like, 'cause I don't know if you got a chance to review them, but like when I'm building them together, I use those changelings as linchpins to pull my cube together when I found because your signpost are strong. Like very strong. And then I could, even if I was like not getting the passes because people are taking me off of it, I'd fall back to a changeling and it would help my deck still have cohesion. I'm huge fan of that. It made me almost rethink my horror cube, but I'm still a little hold back on that.
Well, and I will say the changeling specifically with this Fae Cube, they do an amazing job with one of certainly from the descriptions that you've put out there and what we've read into it, is the party mechanic. And that wasn't something that we necessarily planned on talking about early on, but it's such an incredible mechanic, such an amazing keyword. There's so many things that you can do with that. Tell us about how you've incorporated the party into the Fae Cube, because I'm a big fan of it.
So I'm gonna try to shorten the story as much as possible.
Okay. Make it as long as you need.
D&D cube.
Yeah.
unrelated to the Fae Cube.
Go ahead, do it.
And I sat down with a lot of my D&D cards, and I was just like, okay, I want to incorporate Zendekar's party mechanics and make it the kind of identity here. But over time, I decided to start working on my Fae Cube. And as my cubes adapted, one thing that really made my eyes light up, so to speak, was when I saw all these old Lorewing cards, a lot of these Eldring cards, etc., that just, oh, these are one-card party cards. Or, oh, this just makes these tokens that fill party.
Nice.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, so party entails, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was wizards, clerics, rogues, elves. What am I missing?
It's actually warriors, wizards, rogues, and clerics.
Yeah, so I'm not a D&D player. Apologies.
Yeah.
Nor is Stu. So you have to lead us down this path a little bit. We understand some of it. I've even given it a whirl one time. I tried playing, what do they call it? A one-shot? Is it a one-shot? Am I saying that correctly? Where you just have a fast game? And I got pulled into it. We did it in a bar one day. I was hanging out, having some drinks, as we do here. And I'm in Gainesville, Florida, chilling out. And they said, hey, we're going to do a one-shot tonight. I'm like, what is that? D&D. I'm like, well, I've never played before. So I tried it out. And, oh, my God, I spent an hour and a half building a character, and then they wrapped it up in 30 minutes on the session. It's like, oh my gosh. And before I have to tell you, I made a dwarf. He was fabulous. I mean, he was blinged out. He had magical boots that were covered in sequins. I went nutty. I had a battle axe, and my character was so concerned about getting those boots muddy. That was the character in which I was following, that I couldn't fight and get upset because my boots were getting messed up.
So that was the personality that you chose for your D&D
I flowed
character.
with it. I was having so much fun.
Is a dwarf that cares about how dirty his boots are.
Boots.
That's a
Absolutely.
Everyone who's ever listened to our podcast and ever will, you've just learned the entire of Anthony's personality.
They were sweet boots.
Right there. That was incredible. Wonderful.
Yeah. So tangent number 1. We'll continue forward.
Yeah.
So would you like to continue?
Yes, to expand on the cart party a little bit. So I'm not sure if y'all listened to Maro's Drive to Work.
Sometimes,
he
yes.
went into extensive detail over the Zendikar Rising and a lot of the mechanics that went into it, and they very heavily wanted to put in those D&D themes because that's what original Zendikar was kind of pulling up from. And the way that they approached it is that they kind of had to pick 4 that were relevant to Magic, but also identifiable to D&D. So
Interesting.
even though there are a lot more classes than those 4, by narrowing it down to those just 4, it makes it so that way they're able to overlap and be more concise on what it wants to put in. But the other part that I like about it is that it gives some cube curators who play around with party mechanics, whatever, to create custom rules to be like, okay, well, these are also party. So
nice. And another thing that I like about your cube is I pride myself on, and we kind of talked about this before, I pride myself, just like Stu can, and I'm sure you can too. You look at someone else's cube, and we just did the Uber Cube Clinic. We did that with Jordan Eckenrod, our good friend. And we can kind of snap pick like outliers and make suggestions and like what we're going to put in there. So the first
Not that we're treating this as a clinic, but
we're not. But I was interested to see if I could make some, give you some analogs or make some suggestions. And I immediately had trouble with it. And the reason why is I couldn't get myself in the headspace with your characters. I had to think it's got to be very Eldraine-ish, but then it needs to be a wizard, so it can't just be any old wizard, because when I searched up like a Grixis wizard, it's suddenly a vampire, and you don't have vampires, because this is a happy place. This place seems kind of joyful, but a little bit, they're squabbling, but they're not quite just bloodthirsty, is what I'm getting out of your theme.
Yeah, and not to sort of go into a discussion that we're going to have later on, but we actually talked about curses at one point, because I was like, curses? And Anthony said, curses? That kind of sounds pretty awesome,
Yes.
right? It kind of sounds very fantasy and maybe a bit theatrical and maybe a bit D&D. And yet, when we started looking into the curses, we're like,
There's a
nothing
trap.
really seems to fit the theme of the cube. And I could see,
Yeah.
that immediately like, okay, now we can see why those don't exist.
We were just toying around with it, like if I were curating your cube, what would I do? And I found myself just losing epically. It's so well built. Like I couldn't quite break the shell that you've built. It's pretty awesome. Like, does that make sense? Like you could probably look at some of my cubes.
Absolutely makes sense. I've had a good number of cubes that I've followed where it's just like, I really like the direction and your power outliers, etc. And I wanted to make sure, I'm gonna reroute this a bit.
Go ahead.
Because when I first started the Fae Cube, I started off as I want a higher power differential. I want my bomby cards to be extra bomby.
Yeah.
So I had things like Bone Dragon. I had things like Siege Gang Commander.
Right.
I had things moving that power up a bit. And you still see some bomby cards in here, but their ask is a lot higher.
Nice. I had another question. We can go back and forth with questions. Another one,
Sure.
We haven't really done the flow, but it was interesting. I was looking at a lot of your dragons, and I love dragons. I didn't notice, or correct me if I'm wrong, do you have any of the D&D roll the dice, the new, the metal dragons, basically? Or are they
Not in this cube.
Okay. They're price points, or is it flavor, or all the above, or?
So the big problem with the dice rolling dragons is that it is a very insular thing, and even between them all, there's a big power differential. The only ones that I've run in cubes is the green one, and that's specifically because it does +1/+1 counters. My green,
they're all metal names.
It's
It's
so I'm
like
trying to
copper
think of the different thing. As luck would have it.
Yeah, as luck would have it.
So the point
correct.
is the green has a very insulated dice package, and it fills a very specific role in that cube. Don't want that in the Fae Cube because they kind of are a bit too far. When I look at it, I am looking at, is this stronger than a Shivan dragon?
It's not.
You know?
We just, that episode, when you finish it, a little spoiler here, we talk about these. And one of my biggest qualms with these cards in particular is the sub game of rolling dice. And you can correct us if we're wrong, because you'll hear it. And if you disagree, he and I are not D&D players. And the one thing we talked about is we are not in love with dice all over the field to begin with. Now, I say that, I have a 2-headed giant cube that has proliferate, right? It's a thing. Right. But even in my EDH builds, etc., I don't, and I know nobody's like haphazardly just rolling dice, like throwing them like they're craps tables. But these cards are kind of like more luck based than I want. Sub game-ish, pause the flow, kill the interaction, and it gets weird.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would also say that as well as that, there's also like the whole pushing certain mechanics. We talked about the whole treasure thing, right? We actually talked about this on a previous episode, and that just seems to have been something that's been over pushed in my opinion. And Anthony, I think you would agree that the treasures thing has just got out of control. So just adding a creature, it's a bomb, you get a bunch of mana out of it, but does it fit a theme? Not necessarily. Can it be a little bit win more rather than, fits, a fun archetype that you're obviously trying to put together in a cube like this? And I could definitely see where, like you say, with the green one, +1/+1 counters, proliferate, those kind of mechanics where you're going to get support from those creatures. I can see why you would run those, but not sort of just these pushed value.
That's the one that actually I have literally already sitting there waiting to be sleeved to go on my 2-headed giant cube, only for proliferation, because you can target a creature. I think it's 2 of them with the green one. But I was curious when I was looking through your list, because dragons, you have some amazing dragons. I
really wanted my dragons package to be more lower to the ground and as you said, not everybody likes rolling dice.
Right.
I consider dice a very insulated mechanic.
Right.
It may not require much, but you want it to exist in a vacuum.
Right.
You want reasons to roll dice. And without that reason to roll dice outside of, it's fun to roll the dice, it belongs in my other cube. It belongs in a separate cube. I don't want it in my Fae Cube because it just is not of the play experience I'm looking to foster here.
Nice.
I'm looking to increase the complexity of player decisions rather than add a variant of gameplay that doesn't make the gameplay interesting.
It's something else you got to do, right? I don't want to do anything most of the time except for just hold my cards, tap my mana, play the cards, and swing with creatures and interact.
It adds, as she was saying too, it adds additional variance to a game that's already riddled with a degree of luck and variance that we're trying to, even in high-powered environments, low-powered environments, thematic environments, all the same, we're still trying to better ourselves as players and break that variance the best you can. We're trying to break down permutations and bring the probabilities down by playing better, right?
I don't want the game to be decided because someone rolled a 20 on a D20 and another guy, another player rolled a D1 on a D20. Like that to me is it's rewarding luck, and I always like to limit that.
I like it in Vegas, but I'd rather play, Texas Hold'em. Just saying, poker. But so some other questions that we had kind of formed was we've seen some. You had your clerics and all the things that fell into that party aspect, right?
Yes.
The party package. All right. So then you have the outliers, and you have also you said you had humans, but then you have the subtypes of knights and stuff, and that. I did a recent draft this morning, and that That's going to be my favorite package. These aren't my children. I went through your cube and I'm like, I'm going to pick my favorite. And my favorite's by far, man, I absolutely love your Knight Suite. I think I drafted about 4 times this morning and I built a Orzhov Knight deck, and we'll kind of highlight that. But man, you've got some sick pieces in here. And the one in particular that caught my eye, and it's because my buddy Christian, again, he's in the background, he's our producer, is Saravok. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Saravok.
Saravok the Deathbringer. This card is sick. And for one swamp and 3 colors, you get a legendary creature, human knight, 3/4. At the beginning of each player's end step, if no permanents left the battlefield this turn, that player loses X life, where X is Saravok's power. Choose a background, which isn't relevant here. I will say, in Commander, and I'm going to build this guy, and my friend Christian has also built this guy. This guy is fun to play in Commander, puts on the clock, takes down those droll games, kind of keeps some tempo going. But in your cube, I grabbed a Bone Splitter. And I wasn't really thinking that far ahead. I'm just like, 5 is good enough for me. And you know what? Something about a 5/4 beater was also good enough for me that puts him on a clock.
Any kind of lower power, right? Any kind of environment where you're not got people trying to storm off on turn 2 and turn 3. If you have a 5 power beater, I've mentioned this on a number of occasions on other episodes, 5 power will win in 4 swings. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, and you're also clocking them every turn for... Yeah, I mean, granted, you're taking 5, and there's a certain point where you can't afford to take 5 anymore. I love the tension of this card. Mm-hmm. What is it? What are your thoughts on it, May?
Oh, it's one of my favorite nights as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this was one of those includes where I sat down and I was just like, is this going to be something people are interested in playing, or is this going to burn you more often? And then I really thought about it, and I was just like,
tension.
This makes interesting, engaging
the art.
play.
The art is sick.
By
aggro
itself
package
is enough
to be swing.
Yeah,
It encourages to you can't.
It's kind of
just
it's kind of a sulfuric vortex clockish, and a little bit of gray merchant of Espedal ish, meaning like. It's doing that. I know you're not gaining life. I get it. But it kind of plays in those two. If I was going to push those 2 cards together and make another card, this kind of, it embodies those 2 for me personally.
Yeah, and I will say there's no fetch lands, right? In the cube. So you don't have the option of, I'm just...
Terramorphic Expanse, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have the option of, I'm just going to load up on a bunch of fetch lands, hopefully, or other, a little bit more organic ways of having permanents leave the battlefield. You're probably taking some damage.
It's if it leaves the battlefield too. So I mean, you as May was saying, you could just throw this into attacks, or you can throw your. It's kind of forcing decisions on the battlefield too. They either take the 2 for the weenie that's coming at them, or they allow this to survive to hit you for 5. It creates all these interesting battlefield player dynamics that I love. This card is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's such a cool card in 1v1. It's one of the few cards from Baldur's Gate where I can sit down and be like, this is really good for scaling down to 1v1.
If it cost 1 less, I would probably jam this. I would experiment with that in the power. 1 less, I would try Vintage just for that effect of black aggro. Just 1 more. It's all I needed.
I think you've just
really
got too many things to do with the
benefits in this low speed, lower power environment because while all the other decks are trying to build value and they're trying to get accrue value over time and get micro advantages, Saravok is a clock. This thing comes down and he's just like, well, I now have a threat you have to deal with.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Or else you are going to lose that damage.
The next card that we're going to cover is one of Stu's. He went through and picked a favorite of his.
This is, we talked in one of our early episodes about certain color combinations.
Yeah.
I'm a Gruul player. When I'm not playing Control,
that's not Gruul.
Which I know. I'm a Gruul player. Gruul has green.
Okay. It sounds like Gruul.
Anyway, there's a couple of EDH decks that I play that I just, for whatever reason, they're not super powerful, but they're just fun. They just hit certain parts of my personality. One of them is my Gruul deck, and the other one is Slimefoot. And this isn't Slimefoot, but this is Harold, King of Skemfar. Right? First of all, name's incredible. Legendary creature, Elf Warrior for 1 colorless, 1 black, 1 green. Has Menace, which I love. And when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an Elf, a Warrior, or Tyvar card from among them. Put it in your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. First of all, it fetches a Tyvar.
Secondly,
is there any other card in the history of Magic that does that? And I'm sure if there's one in this cube, then I'll love it. But there's so many new things, and this just embraces new things that I'm finding when I read all the cards of this cube. I love it so much. Menace is another wonderful mechanic. Really can just make, get to 3, start swinging. You better have 2 creatures that you're willing to put in front of it. With 3 power, it's not an insignificant amount of damage. And then I'm getting to go and find another creature that I want. Like, these kind of, like, just really fun. Definitely something that you want to deal with and has that added benefit. And plus, it's an elf. He's standing in front of a tree with purple leaves with, like, a 9-pack, I think that
never
might be.
skipping ab day ever.
Oh, my gosh.
It's either not enough caloric intake and or just literally just hanging out at the gym all the time. This is not a person that goes...
This is the look
This
I
is a
want.
Gold's Gym look.
It's the look that I want. I'm never going to have it, but it's the look I want.
No.
So, as Anthony said before, it very much is supposed to be the vibe of, this is the island of misfit toys.
Right.
Just, like, as soon as you said it, my face just lit up.
Nice.
And Herald really stands as an outlier in a very surprising way. You look at this card for most environments and think, okay, this is just kind of a mid. It replaces itself. It has a menace. It's fine. It's on rate. It replaces itself. Cool, great. But in this environment, it actually is a key linchpin to the Golgari mid-range package because that value is so good. Because it does something that other fetch cards can't. Dig, like Nameless Inversion, like Eyeblight's Ending. It can grab lots of these changeling cards. There are so many ways that you can increase the amount of hits that you can get with Herald that he becomes a very prevalent threat.
Yeah,
I love that.
And again, going back, the changeling thing, which we started talking about early on, how much value can you get from one creature? Again, the menace, very good, 3/2, very good. But because you've got that strong support for all of that, for the changelings, and they're not just a support, right? They're not just thrown in there to make up the numbers. They're such a critical part of the cube that having just something that goes in there and says, I could just go and get any one of these that I like. I love it so much. Awesome.
My signpost, I like to really signal my signpost within my guild sections. It's kind of, we talked about it in a previous episode. It's kind of the, sounds direct, but hey dummy, I'm trying to tell you right now, hey guy, hey, pick me. Like, I do this thing, or pass me, I'm a dead card. But I want them to signify, like, someone that I don't want my guild pieces to be traps. I want them to cross-pollinate, and I want them to reference a thing that you can do. And what I like about this card and this card choice, even if I don't, care that I go get an elf, if I don't get a warrior, this is, as Stu said, a 3/2 menace. I mean, this is just a beater all by itself. This card doesn't fall on the sword by just being the one trick pony, right? So I love this card choice.
I'll also add an additional layer if that's okay.
Yeah, do it.
Yes, please.
There's a lot of layers.
The other layer to it is that because it's 2 color and it has that more quote-unquote restrictive cost,
right?
It actually is better than Boggart Brute. It's better than Bell of the Brawl in its own unique way because it replaces itself. Even though those 2 exist in the cube, they represent that kind of power hinge, I guess. That little level of saying, okay, when you're playing monocolored, they're like 2 in their color. They're easy to put in, they're evasive, whatever. Then you look at Herald, and it's just like, okay, you're paying a little bit more of a precise cost, but you get upside for doing it.
Right. Well,
super cool.
That kind of covers that. But like, if it was a elf and a warrior that he just caught whenever he did the thing, so we wanted to point out another card that we actually identified that would be hit all those triggers essentially, and it would be Ren's Run Packmaster. Is this another favorite? Did we find another favorite? This art is absolutely gorgeous. And for 1 forest and 3 colors, you get a creature, elf, warrior. See? Does a thing. And champion an elf. When this creature enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you exile another elf you control. When this creature leaves the battlefield, that card returns to the battlefield. And for 1 forest and 2 colorless, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. Wolves you control have death touch for a 5/5. This card checks so many boxes. It's amazing. Value. These are like, if tribes can get along, or at least 3 of them, this is how you do it.
It almost feels like a little undercosted at only 4 mana that you're getting a 5/5, and sure, you have to sack an elf. Oh well, I'll sack my mana dork that I use to cast this spell and then get my 5/5 that's spitting out 2/2s every time. Like, this is a monster.
And the next question is, it makes all these wolves and stuff. Why is she riding like this weird jackal moose elk thing?
I'm pretty sure it's like an antelope or a wildebeest of some kind.
Definitely not a
But-
wolf.
Jackalope.
And or you wouldn't want these
Definitely not a
jackalopes near your wolves.
So the reason why I kind of was starting to snicker was because now I'm feeling a little guilty. That I
Yeah, this is your guilty pleasure card. We found the OP card, guys. Ding!
I had
We found the card.
problem.
Pack
I
one,
had the
pick
same
one.
problem with CubeTuber where he was mentioned it on his video, and I was just like, well, about that.
Well, that leads to a great discussion then. What was it about this card? Because obviously we picked it as it feels iconic to me in a cube like this, right? It ticks so many boxes as far as the creature types, what it does. It spits out creatures, great value. What was it about this creature that was like too much? Was it just that
It's not.
Was it too much value? Was it, what
No,
was
it
the
wasn't
reason
too,
for it?
It wasn't too much.
It's
the
not.
thing about champion is that it's as much of a benefit as it is a cost.
Yes.
Champion can be used as kind of like a slow flicker for that value assurance, but specifically with Renzrun Packmaster, only the elf deck wants it, but that supports the wolf deck. And the wolf deck doesn't want it because it's an elf. You get what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah.
Where
And-
you have to have that glue of a lot of changelings, and if a lot of changelings don't come together for your wolf or your elf package, then it's not going to be particularly helpful. The other part of it is that the wolf package is more aggressively costed, compared to knights especially, where you're getting a lot more value from your wolves per wolf that you create because you're being more aggressive with them. Renzrun sits more in that mid-rangey type territory, or that little bit more of control territory, where it's just like, I'm going to dump mana in return, create a Death Touch Wolf, and I'm going to use that to control the board.
Yeah.
You now can't swing into me, while I can just keep building up my board.
It reminds me of like an ant queen or something along those lines. But
Okay.
what I do like about the champion portion is it actually falls into I can't remember the knight that we were talking about before, but that sacrifice, if you sacrifice or a creature left the battlefield or a permanent left the battlefield, you didn't take the pain.
Yeah,
That's what
Sarah
it was. Sarah. So Sarah and these two seem like buddies. That was my
they are
point.
absolutely
And then
buddies.
combos with Herald or synergies rather. I'm going to
Synergize,
use the
yeah,
word synergize. Those
yeah.
3 cards. Spoiler alert! I'm going to draft this cube. Everybody get out of my way. I'm taking these 3 cards. I'm going to win.
You're gonna take the life gain lands?
No.
I was just going to say, I've played with Renzrun Packmaster a couple times, but the decks that it ended up in the Golgari mid-range package. It ended up in the value package.
It's everything.
And the wolf package I included for my girlfriend, it's her favorite tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I very much wanted to support the wolf package, and she did not feel good about having to take an elf and then have more elves in order to play her wolves. She
So-
didn't like that.
Yeah, but
And
what
that's the big reason.
It linchpins. That card's a strong linchpin between your different tribes and your synergies. As those 3 cards that we just kind of back to back, all 3 of those cross pollinate with one another. None of them feel different than the other, but you could play them in different tribes and they could do their own thing, but they can also cross, come into the different groups. And these tribes don't need lords so much. Like I'm in my horror cube, a lot of times I fell into the original trap when I first built my horror cube is I oversaturated lords. And if it's a zombie lord or a vampire lord, the problem is that it would become they wouldn't cross over into the other one, so they would only give the gift to the one tribe, and it made this weird. They didn't bisect so well. Whereas like a card like that really is a linchpin a lot more than a lord, right? I love it.
Right.
The next card that we picked out, so Stu went through and I went through and we picked out some cards that we just were in love with. And I have one right here that also, if I were pack one, pick one, and I believe this will be on my list, only because I've played it in Commander. And it is Skyship Stalker. This card's a bomb.
Oh, it absolutely is a bomb.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be the bomb.
I love Shivan Dragon, but this is this little child that does a little bit better, a little bit more. One more.
So, to give
It's
a
what I'm
little bit of
picking
context.
when I don't get Glory Bringer. I'll just say
Yeah, it's a power down glory bringer.
Yes. I very much needed a 4-drop that can add to the aggro package, because the
Right.
aggro package I don't want to be super strong.
Right.
That's why you'll notice that it has specific anti-synergy
Yeah.
with Ib Halfheart,
Yeah.
with Goblin Razors, whatever. The point is that this card has a specific niche that it's trying to fill of, this is the red aggro package.
Yep.
And unlike Shivan Dragon doesn't end up in the aggro decks. They don't want Shivan Dragon.
Right.
The
Right.
control decks want Shivan Dragon.
I love
the
Shivan
decks
Dragon.
that run the board wipes want Shivan Dragon.
Now, Shivan Dragon being the greatest dragon of all time, and we talk about that in our last episode.
Okay,
the old
boomer.
Gnawbones.
Boomer.
I am a boomer. Yes. Let's talk about what Skyship Stalker does, because it's not a card that a lot of people may be familiar. So Skyship Stalker, for 2 mountains and 2 colors, you get a creature dragon. It's a 3/3, and you can pay 1 mountain. Skyship Stalker gets +1/+0 until the end of turn, or you can do all these. 1 mountain, Skyship Stalker gets first strike, or 1 mountain, Skyship Stalker gets haste. And that's actually the bread and butter for me, is the haste portion.
Yes.
Because you can pay 5 and you get a 3/3 haste. You pay 6, you've got a 4/3 haste. I mean, it's nice. This card is a nice mana sink, does a lot here.
Yeah.
I'm in love with this card. So, good choice, May.
Thank you. So to give it a little bit more context as well, originally I had Thunderbreak Region for that slot.
Awesome
And
card.
I realized very quickly, this is actually awful, because my kind of cornerstones to power of my cube is I have Sarah Angel in here. Why am I having a 4-drop 4/4? I had Sarah Angels right there. Feel good. Skyship Stalker has a very distinct downside compared to Sarah Angel. Sarah Angel's at 4 toughness, which means she gets around Royal Eruption. A lot of those 3-drop hits from red. She gets around Nameless Inversion. Skyship Stalker does not. It has more of an inherent risk for playing it. But when you're playing red aggro, you need that risk to payoff reward, and because it's evasive, it scales, it turns all of your late game mountains into gas.
Yeah.
It gives you some way to help close, and I think that it was a very important role to fill, but I didn't want it in a way where the Dragon Tribal, and this is actually one of the questions I had written down, I didn't want the Dragon Tribal to pay off the payoffs, you know?
Yeah. And I like that this is only a front end, like you were saying, and that it still has the 3 toughness on the back. Makes it more vulnerable, right? So it's risk reward. That's just, and I want to also reference the fact too that you're 100% just tapping into my Magic history, because in our previous episodes, I talk about Sarah Angel and Shivan Dragon ad nauseum, and how that's how I got in, and how many LEDs I may have traded at some point to get one or both of these cards.
Don't think about it. You'll traumatize yourself.
All the cards.
Don't think about it.
All right.
One thing I wanted to ask, like dragons, they're kind of known for being very finishy, right? So they're typically more expensive, higher powered, or the ability to hit really hard. What had to go through your mind during sort of the cube building process to sort of maybe rein in the power on some of these a little bit? And were the ones that you sort of brought in originally and thought, yeah, this looks awesome, but maybe then afterwards you decided, okay, these are a little bit too strong for what I'm trying to do?
Bone Dragon.
Bone
Dragon.
What does Bone Dragon do? I'm not familiar with that one. Is that
so it's 3 black, which, you know, that kind of cost if you're playing black, whatever. It's flying for a 5/4, and flying 5/4 at 5 by itself is already like, this is better than Sarah Angel. It's around the same body as Shivan Dragon, even though it does a different role. But you can also play 3 black to exile 7 cards from your graveyard and return it from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped.
I know this.
That was the part that made it a little bit more. Bone Dragon in most environments is not that powerful, but in this specific environment, it just was too much. It was too oppressive to my cornerstone.
Okay.
Is the best way I'll put it.
Okay.
I want very specifically, so that way people can look at Shivan Dragon and be like, I can reasonably win this with this card.
Yeah.
And the reason I ended up cutting it, more than just I cut skeletons, and believe it or not, there are actually fairy tales with skeletons, but different topic.
Right. It's more grim. That's more grim.
That I really loved, why I put it in the first place, was the fact that it uses my graveyard without it being an exploity way to use it.
Right.
I needed a way to use the graveyard as fuel. And Bone Dragon was a payoff for that. If that card stuck, it was hard to get rid of. It came back, and between those 2 turns, you were probably winning.
Yeah. So as a curator, I experienced that too, where I'm in this... I don't want my power curves to be so flat that the games end up in stalemates, right? Like just two horns locking and no one can get through until someone goes over top of the heap. That's like my worst nightmare. That's the doldrums of playing Magic. So
games need to end.
Yep.
Yes.
Boom. Again, you were just checking all the boxes. Yeah. You're saying
boxes.
Everything. Oh my gosh, I just need you to send affirmations on a daily basis. But yeah. So she's agreed with like 15 of my points, but it's so rare. But
it is. No one's ever done.
No
that
one's ever
before.
done that. Literally,
Not even his wife.
he just maxed out. It was like 14. Now it's 15. Whoa. So,
New record.
but as a curator, I'm always dealing with that. Like, I want to put powerful cards in my cubes, but then you have to be careful with the parameters. You don't want to overset them so that they're going to break the environment. So it's this weird, and it does take play testing. And one unique thing that I've seen you do, you solicit feedback from the community. I do this within the friend circle here or whatever, the 5 or 6 young men that play with me. But outside of that, sure, I get feedback on Cucumber, but I need to do a better job of putting yourself out there and then getting feedback. Because for an example, I took my first leap recently. My artifact cube is going to be featured at CubeCon, and I said, I'm just going to put it out there to everybody's playing it. What card might you suggest? And I've never done that before. That was outside of my comfort zone personally. And I needed a one drop that did a thing, and somebody's like, dude, you should be running Underworld Cookbook. And I'm like, oh, yeah, actually, that's a good point. Actually, I never really thought about that.
I just barely put it in my environment.
Which leads me to, and I saw it in your list, Underworld Cookbook. What was your inspiration for adding that into the cube? I noticed that. That was the whole point of that story. There was a build up there, I promise.
Okay, so is it okay if I give a little bit of context
Always.
to your previous statement?
Absolutely. That's
Always.
what we're looking
If
for.
that's fine.
Give the runways.
Okay. So I actually just barely recently been asking for feedback, and as two part of a problem that I have of I tend to get caught up in my own mind and be like, well, this is how the data looks. This is how people are picking it. This is creating this amount of feels and whatever. But I don't quite give enough time for an environment to settle between my changes. So my way that I was able to circumvent that is, hey, I want to talk about my packages. I want to talk about potential swaps. I want to talk about some cards that I think are maybe problems.
Right.
And I was able to kind of feed into that. The other part of it is that there are 3 people that's reached out to me, and there's probably more that have bought this cube in paper.
Nice.
There are at least 4 people who've cloned my cube.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you start getting that traction where people are starting to make their own version of your cube, your choices need to have a little bit more weight to them.
Yes.
I don't like this card.
You're an artist. You're an artist. They're just buying prints at the museum, by the way. You're still the artist, so don't worry about it. But
right, exactly. But at least this way I can give context and give a way for people to interact.
Yeah.
Now, for your main question with Underworld Cookbook, now that we can actually go back to that as the main subject. So, a little bit of a thought trail. I promise it leads back.
Go ahead.
Curious Pair is the reason why I added.
Oh, there you
Underworld
go.
Cookbook.
I love that card.
Nobody wanted it because it matches it has no matching tribes. Like in terms of the 5 party things, right?
Yeah.
Knights, party, whatever.
Right.
Then it's a human in green, and green has a lot of non-human payoffs. So it's just like green has to look at it and be like, why am I taking this card?
I run that chef EDH deck, so that's why I have an appreciation for everything you're saying. It's a goofy, the one that makes the I guess the Golgari chef, and everything in it's food based. When I saw that, I was like,
Guillaume.
The pizza de la resistance.
So the reason why it's based around Curious Pair, why I threw in Underworld Cookbook, is because I don't want to cut Curious Pair. Its flavor is perfect. It does a thing that is good. It is a good card.
It's so
I just need to give
perfect.
players of the tools to play it.
I love it.
Is when people drafted it, they wouldn't see the tools for that deck to come together, and now we do. Now I threw in things like Tempting Witch, which is the 2 and a black, comes in, makes a food. You can pay 2, tap it, sacrifice a food to deal 3 damage. That turns your food into ammo.
Yeah.
Now your food package matters.
That's pretty awesome.
And the other part of it is that I included this new card from Baldur's Gate, Halsin Emerald Archdruid, which is 3 and a green, legendary creature elf druid. Pay 1 until end of turn, target token you control becomes a green bear creature. In addition to its type, base power and toughness 4/4 in addition to its colors and types. There you go.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, so you got payoffs for food. That's pretty cool. I like it a lot.
So now this turns your food into, my food are now weapons. Because before food was meant to be, okay, this is like your life gain trigger. You can use it with Servok to help make it so that way you can mitigate the problems. You can use it to put yourself out of range of aggro. But people don't put that much effort into something that, like food. They just want a card that comes down and says, I gained some life.
That's what I was just going to make that point immediately. Yep. Food is an underrepresented part of Magic.
I love it.
Okay? Free food,
Free
Make
food.
food great again, whatever we need to do to get more exposure to the food. And I will say, Curious Pair, I'm blanking on the set that it was released in, but
It's Eldraine, right?
it was from Eldraine, right?
Yeah.
So it was the first card, and it might be the only card, and I got like the alternate art, full border, foil.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
When I first opened it,
so gorgeous.
I was like, this is the most beautiful card. And it's worth like 10 cents.
It's Hansel and Gretel.
But
it's
Grimm. It's such a pretty card. Like,
I mean, there's an entire Ristic Studies episode about it for a reason. Yeah. It's a beautiful card.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's perfect for the flavor of my cube.
Absolutely.
It's perfect for the themes of my cube. I don't want to cut it. So my solution is...
Don't cut it. Don't cut it. Make it work.
Make it work.
Make it work. I'm refusing to cut it.
We're already running it because right now we've literally named 5 cards and we've been intentional and you have flowed with it. All of these have synergized in somehow, except for the sky, except for the dragon that we went red for a minute. But if you notice that list we just went through, all those cards play uniquely well together, and they could all go in the same deck.
Yes.
Stu's actually highlighted the next card, and I think this is fascinating. Would you like to cover this one, please, Stu?
So this one I like because I said before, I like Gruul, I like Golgari, but I also love my control. So white cards, I always kind of look out for them, especially because I'm a vintage cube. I like to, I'm a kind of a mono white aggro player. This is not a mono white aggro card, but it's a white card, and it's stick together. 3 colorless, 2 white. Each player chooses a party from among the creatures they control, then sacrifices the rest. To choose a party, choose up to 1 of your cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. Now, obviously, you're not choosing 1. You're choosing the full party. So you can literally choose all 4. Such an amazing encouragement with a card like this to make sure I want my changelings. I want to make sure I've got my clerics, got my rogues, got my warriors, got my wizards. It encourages me within that, obviously the color of this card, but then in the color of, if I want to pull it into like a white blue or a white black or whatever, I want to bring those cards in. I want to find as much support as I can for the full party, because the value I could potentially get out of this card is just a huge blowout. And I think, again, thematically for the party, wonderful card.
I like this card too, because the first thing that thinks in my mind is there is a strong chance that there'll be 2 parties on the table. This is a card where I would want to double spell almost with, intentionally, to take them off of one of their party members to make it a one-sided type rift situation, as in I'm going to take out your party by killing your rogue or whatever, right? Your changeling.
Take your changeling. There we go. Yeah. You want to get rid of that changeling and force them to make a decision.
And now make them have that tension, then blow the board up. Now you've got this isn't, you just broke parity with this card. But it does cost more. Yep. Let's be very hypothetical. What is your lowest CMC for removal spells, just off the top of your head? Like, what can we do the thing I just said?
The lowest CMC for removal is at 1 mana for shock, disperse, deadweight. Okay. Those are like the big ones. So and there's, of course, portable hole as well, but...
Okay, so potentially this could be a 6 mana win con. That's immediately started kind of running this through my mind. How would I take it so I could break parity on this card? Because this is not something where I just want to see the board go boom. And I know that if they're not doing the thing, sure, the parity will be broken. But I'm going with there's a strong chance of changelings, because I found those as linchpins a lot, that I think it could happen. I want this to be an effective board wipe that's not stagnant. And how would I break it? So I started doing that immediately.
Yeah.
So to add a little bit of context, because I have this cube in paper, I played a lot with my pod. Stick Together was suggested to me by one of my players, kind of, in an inadvertent way of, I need more party payoffs. Where are my white party payoffs? And it's just like, well, what's wrong with party affinity? And it's just like, well, I can't get through damage. And I'm like, well, okay, you're right. So I'm like, okay, Stick Together. That card's perfect. Flavor's perfect. It's a great party payoff. But every single time that it's been put into a deck so far, every single game that we played it in, it has been a house.
Has been effective?
I was worried about what you were saying of what happens when we both have a board of changelings.
Right.
Then we're not really getting rid of the board. But that doesn't actually end up happening that as often as you think.
Okay.
More often than not, you're the party deck.
Okay.
And the other person isn't.
And the other one's lame because they're not at the party.
They're playing elves. They're playing goblins. Whatever.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say. You kind of maybe forgot. some of the other stuff that we were talking about. And literally, what was the last card that we mentioned was the dragon.
Yeah.
It really is going to suck for the person who drafted this awesome dragon deck and put a bunch of dragons out onto the battlefield. Hey, where's your dragon warrior?
You didn't get an invite to the party, bro.
No.
Yep.
Sorry, dragon.
Sorry, dragon. You're not welcome. You
And
burned down
that's
the last
also
party.
the other layer to stick together that makes it so good.
I
in
like
this
it.
cube is that all of the top end cards are not party cards.
Right,
the only
right.
one here is like Changeling Hero, Changeling Titan, and then Web Weaver Changeling. Point is that all of those are changelings. You're not getting party.
I
at top
love
end.
changelings.
Yes.
Yeah, they're glued together. So we're kind of getting towards we're tempoing up here a little bit. But one of the things that Stu and I chose to do is we both picked I've already said the word favorite a lot with your cube because there's a lot of favorites. But I do have my favorite. But before I do that, Stu has a card that he actually identified that he loves very much that he thought was interesting.
Yeah, so not thematically color-wise, definitely thematically fits cube-wise, and this is Cradle of Baldur's Gate, blue-black, one blue, one black, for a human elf rogue. Kind of fits the human, kind of fits the rogue, not really in the elf colors, but when it deals combat damage to a player, the player loses 1 life and mills a card, then you gain 1 life and scry 1. That's a whole bunch of awesomeness right there. And then when you attack, you may pay 2 colorless, and if you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. Not a huge amount of damage that you're getting with it on the creature itself, because it's just a 1/3.
Right.
But I can just imagine all the strategies. Mill, being able to sculpt your hand with scry, being able to prevent, a creature from blocking. So much value again on one creature. Tell us a bit about this one. And again, doesn't fit the elves from the green perspective, but fits in the cube perspective.
It's like a dark elf.
So believe it or not, that elf typing does matter even outside of its colors, because having elf means that you can't get hit by Eye Blight's Ending.
Oh,
Just
there you
destroy
go.
target non-elf creature.
Okay.
And now all of a sudden it's just like, okay, I can't hit it with Dark Banishing. I can't hit it with...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nice. I see what you did there. Because
Why am I spacing it?
No, you're not. You're. When I was drafting your cube today, I was coming across a lot of your removal, and a lot of it was specific to creature type and or color type. This card kind of gets around that. He's a little bit less vulnerable. That's pretty sweet.
So even though it's not specifically part of the elf package, it has that up as an upside.
And it's a rogue. I mean, at the end of the day, it's party. It's party, and this is elf rogue, so it's doing all the party stuff too.
Even by itself, it's such an engine, because if you just target it itself every turn, you're dealing 2 every turn. Because you're dealing that extra 1 whenever he swings.
Yep.
Right.
Black package to be, I have a bunch of things that hit you for damage before they actually connect.
Right.
It's their own form of evasion that lets them play aggro in a different way. I did an entire write-up on a different kind of black aggro, where I wanted to make sure that my black aggro package is very much based around additive damage, additive drain, and etc. Cridle feeds into that very, very well.
I like
it. Combo him with another card called Night Market Lookout, which is a 1-drop, 1 black. It is a human rogue, and when it becomes tapped each turn, just in any way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So with Cridle, all of a sudden, you're hitting for a lot of damage per turn.
Right. So you've got...
Because this thing's hitting for 2. Cridle's going to come in and guarantee hit for 1, even if it doesn't connect. That 3 toughness is going to get around a lot of those big, those 2-drops. So it's a very, very safe card.
It's pretty sweet.
One thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's a point that you raised in what we just talked about with this card, and a little bit earlier as well, was with the removal, right? So you just talked about the removal that this card specifically dodges because it gets around, the non-elf, right?
Yep.
No fatal push.
Not on theme.
It's generic.
Yeah.
Again, not on theme. Where did you sort of think about the numbers when it comes to the removal, and what was your sort of decision-making process when it came to sort of specifying how the removal would interact with really all the creatures and creature types in the cube, right? Because it does sound like the removal side of things has been kind of focused on getting rid of certain aspects of those creature types within the cube, rather than just like, hey, I'm going to throw Fatal Push, Dismember, and all of the sort of what I would call maybe easy removal.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's been a lot of thought process going in behind the removal. So tell us a bit about that.
The better your removal, the more aggressive your decks are going to become. If you want your format to be slow, mine is supposed to be slow. Mine is supposed to be I'm trying to get into my late game creatures. I'm trying to outvalue with micro advantages. I'm trying to get some kind of leg up on you until I can get the big bomb to close.
Okay.
So your removal is directly responsible to how other decks curve. Why would somebody ever want to play a 5 CMC above creature when it just dies to a 1 CMC removal? It doesn't feel good.
Right.
Yeah.
The
It doesn't
trade-off
feel
is not
good
there.
to the person playing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel interactive, like really, until you push the level of those top end cards. And I don't want to push the top end of the cards. I want to stay at that Sarah Angel, Shiv and Dragon level.
Okay.
That was a very important linchpin. So I had to ask myself, what's the way that I can make removal aggressively targeted without severely hindering density in a way that allows players to feel good about their plays? And the big part of that is tribal, very specifically tribal.
Yep.
A lot of this toughness matters, where 3 toughness is a very big border point because you have Royal Eruption, you have Nameless Inversion, which is the best of removal in this cube.
Okay.
Because that 3 toughness hits 80% of targets. You don't really think about that on first glance, but when you sit down and break down the data, because I'm a total data nerd, I can sit here and be like, okay, shock and eliminate, they hit about 60% of the cube. They have a very good job of being cheap. They hit a bunch of things. They hit 60% of the cube. They hit all of my important targets that those aggressive decks need to get rid of. And they also hit the things that the control decks want to get rid of so that way they can stay in the game. But it doesn't hit the top end. And all of my decisions here are, how does this affect my top end? Eye of Light's ending can't hit the changelings, and that's a big deal. But it's tutorable, so it gets another upside. The other elf packages can just go grab it, and that's something that Dark Banishing can't do, for an example. That's something Murder can't do.
Right.
It's because it's elf tribal, isn't it? By that particular card, so you can actually fetch it with certain cards because it's considered
exactly.
So
my approach is that I'm not trying to make your removal quote unquote bad per se. I'm trying to make your removal have a specific niche and a specific percentage of targets for you to hit.
And a goal, I would imagine.
I like that.
Whenever I could imagine you more you play it, the more you're going to start to realize, I don't want to just waste a removal on this one creature just to squeeze through an extra 3 or 4 damage. I need to make sure that I've got these held back, because the next turn or two, that bomb could come down, and then the game is totally shifted in your favor if I don't have this specific removal. Because again, you don't have that backup plan of, the dismember or the other sort of more premium and pricey removal spells that are more generic catch-all. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, great explanation.
Yeah, that's a good answer. All right, so let's move over to our next card that I picked out. This is, I want to reiterate, I've picked a lot of cards, and I keep saying, this is my favorite, this one's my favorite, this
This
one's
is
also
your
my favorite.
actual favorite.
But this is
your
my
favorite.
This is my most favorite of my favorites, okay? All right, so it's going to be Ariel, the Knight of Windgrace. Yeah,
Love that card.
I do too. This card's pretty amazing. It's a great commander card too. First question is this somehow connected to Lord Windgrace's lore, or is it just coincidentally Windgrace? I mean, that's just a question for the community.
That is a great question.
Right? But because, okay. Well, so maybe somebody out in the Twitterverse could answer that for us, please, because I don't feel like lore checking, but we'll throw that out to the world.
I'll crack a beer and
Can I have one too, please, or is it all about you?
All right, I'm cracking one for you.
There you go. I like that.
More of my whiskey sour.
Here, keep passing them along. We're not even going to edit this out as well, because I feel like it's a big part
gotta be real. It's
of
a big
what we
part.
do. The libation's got to keep flowing.
Yeah, we got to keep it flowing. The conversation. We have to talk about Lord Windgrace, and we can't do that without drinking a Guinness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not a magic aficionado, a lore person.
I am not.
Right?
You'll find out.
I don't know anything about.
You're going to find that out, like, how pitiful I am in that upcoming episode where I couldn't remember Mishra's name.
It's Mishra.
Yeah, but I forgot it. I was just totally blanked. I don't know, but it was just gone.
I guess I will start by adding that there's going to be 2 layers to how I address this.
Sure.
One is the context of my cube, is that when you're building an environment, and how Wizards of the Coast builds their environment, is that they have specific themes that they're trying to match. They have specific flavor goals and specific world that they're trying to build. They're not just throwing in cards for the sake of throwing in cards. They're trying to create an environment. Since mine is a flavor cube, I have to care about that. Ariel has her own lore. She has her own thing. She's a legendary creature, but the way that I'm able to translate that into my cube is she is a knight who leads knights.
Yep.
She she rides a cat.
And would you mind
That's
reading off
pretty
the
cool.
Would you mind reading off the stats for the listeners, because she's maybe a card that's a little bit outside of
Absolutely.
people's knowledge base, please.
Absolutely. So Ariel is a 2 white black for a legendary human knight, vigilance. 2 and a white tap to create a 2/2 white knight vigilance vigilance knight, and then you can pay 1 black tap untapped knights you control, and destroy target creature with power X or less.
Yeah, it's got a lot of words, and I think that's why I was so passionate about this card. I've been beat to death by this in EDH anyways, and the art's spectacular. Is she riding Windgrace? It looks like Lord Windgrace's art.
I'm pretty sure Windgrace is the specific...
He's a puma, isn't he?
Kingdom.
He's a puma or something like that.
Oh, Windgrace is a kingdom. I thought Windgrace was a character.
I think it might be related to the kingdom, because I don't
We're
think
gonna have
she's
to
part
Google
of
this
Benalia.
lore. Yes.
Again, I'm not super
because
into
Lord
the
Windgrace is
Dominaria lore
like
as
a
much as I
jaguar or
should
a
be,
puma in the
funnily
art.
enough. I guess I will go into the second part of Ariel. Besides just her flavor impact of just being she's a knight, she's supposed to be in that role, but her mechanical function is she's a vigilance creature, 4/4 on rate, and then just at the end of every turn you can pay 3, make a knight. She acts as a very realistic threat in clock to a certain extent, where she's able to create her threats. One rule that I wanted to make sure is very clear in my cube. I only have 1 card that currently breaks it, and I'm not a huge fan of it anyways. Every tribal card needs to be incidental somehow. Cards need to be playable on their base floor without their tribes, because I need drafters to feel like, well, I can still play this card, you know?
Yeah. You're not always going to get the
that
perfect
draft
draft
experience
right?
is really tailored. Ariel checks that box because she creates the things she supports. Even without the other knights, she could tap herself at the end of turn to just destroy something with power 1, which is a lot of things. A lot of things are relevant at power 1.
Yeah, that was actually a point that I was going to make, is that because, you're not typically, especially in the first few turns, you're not going to be looking at, you already said 3 was pretty tough, right? Pretty big for a creature. 4s and 5s and 6s are pretty unlikely. So already you've got quite a significant wall in front of you just with Ariel herself. You maybe get 1 or 2 activations to put those additional knights on the battlefield, and I almost feel like you got to go do something pretty nuts to get past that.
It does that Lord type of synergy I was talking about before without falling into the trap of being the anthem type lords, right? Or dependent. It doesn't say others, where a lot of the lords will say other vampires, other other rats, etc.
I think the number 1 mistake any curator makes when it comes to tribal or trying to introduce tribal into the cube, and this is just outside of the theme of, oh, this is specifically a tribal cube, that's its gimmick, whatever. In the context of tribal as an archetype, not just as a cube theme, the trap that people fall into is that they will throw in a bunch of these lords that only care about one tribe.
I did that. I'm guilty.
Yep. Because what happens is that players will be like, okay, well, I already know that this tribe isn't very good or is very good, so I'm just going to ride the rails to it.
It puts the draft
together. It doesn't.
Yeah, it puts the draft on rails. It kind of takes away it takes away drafters' agency, because they once you've taken 1 or 2 of these, you have to commit to the bit, even if it's kind of not a great deck, right? And then we'll use vampires as an example. A lot of them will be black. Occasionally get a Rakdos, I know, or etc. But a lot of them, if you do the lords, they're going to be very pip intensive. And now they've pulled you in as a drafter where you've just committed so heavy into black. Now, in order to make this deck even function, you have to maybe splash in 1 or 2, spells or other colors, but otherwise you're pulled into black so heavy at that point. Lords pull you in.
I agree, and I will say that I will admit that I fell into that trap on a commander level. I built a tribal deck, and I was like, oh my gosh, lords, that's incredible. I'm just going to throw as many of them in there as possible. But then the more I played it, the more I started to realize they don't really do a whole lot. Adding +1 is okay if I'm really, really trying to be hyper aggro. But I'm not trying to be hyper aggro in most of the decks that I build, and I'd rather a card that just did something more. I either want it to be more from a power perspective, but also from a fun perspective as well. Just having something that comes in and buffs your creatures is nice, but is it really what I want to be doing? Not really.
And to fortify May's point, we're going to call these contextually lords, but they're not the typical anthem or others. These are utility lords, and those are quite fine. And then in addition to the fact that this is Orzhov, back to the point that I made earlier when we started talking about this, I like these to be signpost. I love my guilds to say, do this thing. This is why I'm encouraging you as a drafter. Not putting you on rails, but giving you options, but it's also splashable. And because those utility points that she was referring to are very standalone as is, just kind of has nice cohesion.
When it comes to cube signposts, do you prefer guild signposts or archetypal signposts? And they sound like the same thing at first until you realize things like Wildfire is a signpost for the Wildfire deck.
Right. Yeah, so certain cards are iconically linchpins anyways, like Goblin Guide is the until we had the super monkey that makes treasures. But Goblin Guide was the iconic linchpin for what people saw as aggro, right? And if people were drafting it, that was the linchpin. Some of these cards are not going to be able to shed the skin of being linchpin. No. Could you run Goblin Guide in a control deck? You could if you needed a bottom spectrum of it. I would not encourage it, but you could do it. So they don't have to conform to the norms of what the card says it must do. But some of these cards, like back what you're saying, Wildfire, Burning a Zinye, etc., these cards are kind of unfortunately categorized and going to do the one thing they do, and they're only going to play that archetypically. In addition to, we have an episode coming out very shortly where we're going to discuss opposition. It's one of those cards, like it, love it or leave it, it's still going to be a linchpin and also signpost and archetypical. And sure, you can put it in a control shell, but at the end of the day, it's still opposition. It can't break the mold of its own self. It created its own archetypes. Does that answer your point?
Yeah, I will say archetype 100%. I'm always looking for that. And if let's talk about opposition. It's not in this cube, but if I see something like that, I'm going to acknowledge that as a linchpin. Again, another word that you like to use. I'm going to use that as something that is a signpost for what I want to do with the deck, right? I want some tokens. I want the way to gain some incremental or constant value from that kind of card. So yeah, I'm going to look at that archetypal rather than a tribal. The
reason I wrote this down, and I'm sure the reason that it naturally came up as well, is that in my specific cube, you'll notice in my write-up, I don't have a guild write-up. Right. I didn't break down the guilds because the guilds aren't representative of the archetypes that are available. Correct. They are the tools available to you.
They're utilitarian.
If you want to play Selesnya Knights, you can play Selesnya Knights. Yep. I'm not stopping you.
Sure. So because your rules, and this is what I love about this type of curation, and again, we're going to advertise. We're going to do another episode on thematic cube builds, and I may be reaching out to you on that idea because you've created rule sets within the game of Magic that you're not breaking. You've put in pillars that you can't cross, right? Like you were talking about early on that I don't want to power creep. I have budgetary restrictions. I have thematic restrictions, etc. We create these own lanes for ourselves, but then we have to create we don't want to put the drafters on rails either. So it gets this weird mix when you're trying to curate a cube. It's difficult. I want to build something that says back to the lords, using those as an example. Maybe Stu's drafting my vampire deck, and I want to signify with Rakdos that they love vampires, but I don't want to over accentuate that so that he becomes on rails, because this is a limited format. I'm not trying to get him to build a constructed deck. He can just do that on his own if he wanted to.
And I will say I agree with that point. Constructed is interesting, but I find that if you do sort of break that, and you do find that the tribes, if you will, are setting the standard, then the drafts kind of just happen automatically, right? The creativity for each of the drafters gets broken because you get a couple of great goblins early on, and suddenly I'm just drafting goblins the rest of the draft, right? Why would I not? Similarly with knights or, any of the other tribes that you have. I don't want the draft to just happen autonomously just because each of the drafters got a couple of those power picks early on. And this actually led me towards, I had a couple of questions laid out, and one of them was about the parity that you have. And this really is an amazing follow-on to that point, is you've got this amazing parity with the colors, with the tribes that you have. How difficult was that for you to just have all the parity with the colors, with the tribes, and yet still separate the archetypes to be completely agnostic when it comes to the tribes that are within the cube? Because that to me is mind-blowing that you were able to have all that support and not be focused on the tribes.
So I have the approach that your job as a curator is to create the tools so players can find their own fun. Like that's the number one rule of game design is follow the fun.
Yes.
Right.
And part of that is when I put in something like a generic lord, I'm going to completely call out one of the like cards I dislike the most in this cube, Inspiring Veteran. Don't like that card. I really don't.
What does that card do? What does that card do so people can...
Inspiring Veteran is a red and a white creature human knight. Other knights you control get +1/+1, and it's just a bear.
Yeah, so
I hate this card.
That goes back to the point that we were talking about before. It puts drafters on lanes, or it's a dead card in the draft, and you and I are kindred in this subject. Using my horror cube versus the Fae Cube is because I fell in this trap too, where I keep wanting to put these lords in, so people feel like they have anthems. So because a lot of my creatures, vampires, they're tiny. Or even some zombies, they're 2/2s. So how do I make them better? I make them into 3/3s. It doesn't really work. And then maybe you get 4/4s. But then you realize, oh man, I quit. The zombies have dried up. Now I have to go over to, and it makes these lords dead. So I 100% agree with the fact that you wouldn't like the cards. The complete difference, but it's a 180 based on what you showed us before, where the Lord-esque card was utilitarian, whereas this one's just straight up static anthem. Static anthems for curators that are out there that are new to the idea of the tribal game. You have to be very sparse with them because, as May has pointed out, they can lead to traps. They're either just a blank card in your hand, or they're a 2/2 bear at the end of the day, right? Yep. A do nothing, and that's the point I think she's making. So that's good for new. That's good for new curators to be aware of.
This card, like I was fully aware of this trap before I put it in.
Oh well,
it got mentioned to me.
Mistakes were made, May. Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were absolutely made. I'm not a big fan of it. I want to get rid of it. I just have to find the right replacement for it. Fair enough. But it was suggested to me in one of the Cube Discords because they wanted to be like, well, I feel like that your Mardu Knight's signpost should be a little stronger, so maybe you should throw in an Inspiring Veterans. That way you can kind of push the aggressive, go wide nature of it. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I could just to act as more of that knight thing. But as you've noticed with a lot of my knight packages, that there are a lot of non-creatures. Yeah. A lot of this is kind of value stuff because I have to keep it in that nice balance in order to that way they're costed, so that way they're a bit higher and a bit more value than wolves are. Because as soon as they get more available and more cheap, they just push out wolves. Yeah. Which leads to a point that they're effectively bears, just upside.
As a curator, we have to learn how to disseminate feedback, right? Because it's contextual. So you'll hear me moan and groan about this on our episodes about, like, you know, Stu and Christian and my buddy Chris and all of them. And, well, Chris is a curator, so I'll give him a little bit more slack. But they'll have feedback or ideas. They're like, why aren't you running this card? Why don't you slot this in? This card is weak or whatever. But what they don't realize is that you're looking at it, May, from 40,000 square feet up in the air, and you're looking at all directions, multidimensional, and you understand that this fit is either archetypical, it's a linchpin, it plays some very specific role, and or something supports it and requires this card to be present. Otherwise, though, if you just look at it, if you look at things just specifically try to pick cards out or parse them out, they may not look so powerful. Going back to the Underworld cookbook that we talked about earlier, if I just put that card in front of you and said, hey, you should cube with this, and you'd be like, no?
I love that card personally. It sets up my
you don't have to sell me. You don't have to sell me on it. But just imagine if you've never seen it before, right? You're new to Magic, and this card is placed before you, and you go, "This card is kind of powerful," and you're like, "No, it's not. It's a cookbook." But it's just one of those things that you learn that there's a lot of synergies that you can tie into that. But you know that because you specifically curated your cube in order to bring that in, and that's kind of back to the we referenced our other episodes, but we talk about the old gnawbone method that we talked about, and one of the things we talk about is we kind of put an old gnawbone in a vacuum, and we may have downed on that poor creature a little bit, but in reality, in this type of cube, it's bonkers.
Yes, it would be very strong.
And my Power Vintage cube, not so bonkers. It's all about context, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point context that I'm making.
Matters.
I actually wanted to bring this up.
Sure.
But this was a question that I have. But I actually think it might be better suited for Anthony to talk about this, given that Anthony completely broke the experience for us one day by adding in one of his cubes.
Oh, yes.
Put a silver bordered card.
Yes.
in one of his cubes.
We'll just tell you it was Earl of Squirrel.
It was Earl of Squirrel.
Yeah,
I love Earl of
Yeah,
I love Earl of
you
Squirrel.
do until you're on the other side of the table, and I support Squirrel Tribal.
Yeah.
No, I still love it.
It was disgusting.
Hang on a second.
Whoa.
If you have enough
shouldn't be
token
in
hate,
here.
then it's fine.
I made a mistake. The card's bonkers.
There weren't no squirrel hate. There was no like magic pellet gun
Oh, my
or
God.
squirrel traps or none of that. No, it was pretty rough. But I see that you
It was a
had
Chatterstorm. It was
well, you had
stupid.
Circadian in the cube, and is that still a card that's in the cube?
No.
And tell us why. Tell us why, Mike. We'd love to hear.
Okay, so this was actually one that I actually got a lot of negative feedback about, where they're just like, what the heck? I missed the bird. Where did it go? And I was just like, this card is strong. It doesn't completely outshine Sarah Angel in the fact of it's neither a flying nor a vigilance. It's either or, depending on time of day, which is completely external factor. And to be clear, I like running those cards.
Okay.
I don't care about some external factor affecting cards. It makes it a little bit more interesting because it gives you an extra layer to consider when drafting the card. Makes it interesting. But the other part of it was a lot of flavor reasons. It reminded me a lot of Knights of Cahul. Owls come up a lot in flavor, especially with fairy tales. It added more of that night, big payoff density, added more of that life gain density. But the more that I looked at it, the more I was like, this is not really a card I want White to be doing.
Yeah.
It moves the bar a little too far for Knights. I like my Knights package, but I want my Knights package to do a very specific thing, and Cadian kind of brings it a little further than I want.
Okay,
Fair enough.
That's fair. I realize I originally said I stole that back from you, but it spoke to me because I was on the receiving end of that Earl of Squirrels, and I just kind of looked when it entered the battlefield, and I was like, what the heck is this card doing here, man? This just doesn't look like, it should be. And I will say the reason why it shouldn't, in my opinion, and you might be, you might think differently, I didn't think it should be there because I thought it was too powerful.
Yeah.
But anyway, so as we're on the theme of like questions about the cards, I was so excited to have yourself on the podcast. I would love to do it with other curators as well, is that, we've got to talk more as a community about other cubes, right? Because I think this is the way that you're going to get more and more people interested into cube, right? People in the Magic community know what cube is. They know what the vintage cube is, but it's open people's horizons a little bit and say, hey, not only is there a vintage cube, which can scratch the itch if you want to go hyper power, but there's also all these other cubes where you can scratch the itch. It's
kind of like
I don't always want to play super
Monopoly is the most known board game out there in the world, and everybody knows Monopoly, but guess what? Ticket to Ride's pretty fun too.
Do you know anyone
you have to
that
expand
likes
people.
playing Monopoly?
I do.
I love
Do you know
Monopoly.
anyone
Sometimes
else
it depends
that
on your
likes
player.
playing
It really
Monopoly?
Masochists love Monopoly.
It really depends on your play group.
Stu,
If your play group is, yeah, sure, I want to make deals, I want to do whatever, and we want to add extra texture to the game, then,
All right.
suddenly it's
Isn't
more
that cube
interesting.
though?
But then,
You've just described cube right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? You can modify all the rules, you can make all these changes to make the game more interesting, make it slower, make it faster. I've played the absolute cutthroat, right? You can land on any property you buy it right there. Or you can make the deals, or you can't buy a colour if someone else has already bought one, or all these stuff. Well, now you're changing
You're creating an experience for your players. The thing that we do when we go through and look at these cubes, and every curator does this, is you try to go back to the 40,000 foot approach, and you look at it and you try to see what can I make for recommendations. It's in our nature, isn't it, May? You can't help ourselves. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I look at them and I'm like, hey, you should try this card out, and that's what Stu was talking about before. Mm-hmm. So one of the,
like I said, I'm not sure if you saw the DM, but I already sent you the recommendation.
Yeah. So unlike some, I believe in feedback when you're doing constructive criticism, that you also provide a solution to the problem, right? No one wants negative feedback with no way out. So the one card that was caught my eye, and feel free to defend it viciously, is Cruel Ultimatum. And then I'm going to explain why. Well, here's why. I know the card's powerful, but I have 2 points to make to it. For 2 blue, 3 black, and 2 red, you get a sorcery, so speed tempo problem here. Target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, then loses 5 life. You return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, draw 3 cards, then gain 5 life. And then it says, there's always a greater power. Okay, so a couple of things. I know you love this card, but allow me to explain my points. For one thing, it's uncastable.
Yep.
Forever. And then secondly, it's a sorcery. So it's still uncastable and it's a sorcery. But the biggest problem, removing all that from the equation for me personally, because your cube has a story to tell, this is the most cruel, vicious thing in the entire story. It almost breaks the mold of, like, what I picture is when your elves and all that are fighting is there's some squeaks and people are going ew and pee and poo, and there's like, right, because it's a Fae Cube, right? There's no blood all over the battlefield. These people are just kind of, I don't know, pings. But this card just seems
It's the
thematically,
That's
this seems
like to me.
very much outside of the cube's experience. And I know you want to inject, you're chomping at the bit, but I have a suggestion that pictorially still follows it. And hear me out.
Okay.
It's castable. Let's start with that. It's
Okay.
Croesus Charm. The picture is a dragon holding a pendant, so still meets the thematic requirements. And it's for Grixis. Right. You get an instant, so now have a speed thing. It's not OP.
Right.
Choose one. Return target permanent to its owner's hand or destroy target non-black creature, which pinpoints one of the rules you made earlier we talked about that it can't overly specify. So power level's not there. Or destroy target artifact. And a pretty bauble of persecution. So thematically, I think that card encompasses the flavor of your cube, in my opinion, and is castable and more expedited. And what are your thoughts? That's my first criticism. I promise there won't be many more.
No, criticize all you want. So first of all, yes, it is uncastable.
Yes.
Yes, it is expensive, and it is a
it's
sort
sorcery.
of cruel kind of prank in its own way. But for me, this was entirely a selfish pick.
It was.
I love that card.
I know. Okay. Yeah, you just want to do that to somebody, and
Yes.
yeah. I feel
I
it
was
feels.
entirely selfish in putting it in, but
Yeah.
but I actually do have a reason that it fits the flavor,
Uh-huh.
because there is a very distinct grim flavor to my cube. The more that you look at some of the things that is going on in each of these colors, the more you're like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of like fairy tales with twist.
Yeah.
Fairy tales a little bit more not afraid to get on the dirty side.
Sure.
Like
sure.
these elves are just racist. I'm sorry, but
They are.
the
They
only
are in
elf
fact.
to put it. They
They
are.
are. Yeah, because
But
I mean, what elf actually likes a goblin? Let's just start there. And
Exactly.
right. They might like wolves, but they're not riding goblins.
No.
All right.
Exactly.
So that was my first
Cruel
suggestion.
Ultimatum
Yes.
is an external. What's the word I'm looking for? It's an external quote unquote narrative piece.
Sure.
In the same way Fractured Sanity is in here.
Okay.
Even though Fractured Sanity
Sure. Yeah, I do.
doesn't come
Yeah.
up in fairy tales directly, it is a theme for those stories and etc. People
Yeah.
who lose their sanity and how they cope is, fairy tales, and is
Right,
very
right,
appropriate
right.
with time. It's sort of a meta commentary of those fairy tales. Cruel Ultimatum is more on the nose of that's a very fairy card. That is very much of a card that you look at and say, okay, fairies have very cruel ultimatums. This
Sure,
is a very
sure,
on
sure.
the nose choice. Your
Interesting.
story needs to have your antagonist, and your antagonist has to be the greater power.
Maybe-
I
it's an
agree.
on the nose
I agree.
narrative.
Yeah, you're teaching Anthony something right now.
I mean, you're storytelling.
You're teaching him,
Yeah.
a storytelling element that he doesn't quite have.
No.
With big, maybe you
It's a
need
direction
to-
that my cube does that not a lot of other cubes do.
I
maybe
mean,
you need
it's
to
a
make
big-
that's why
Cruel
it's
Ultimatum.
It's a big
with you.
spell. I mean, you could do it. Your tempo is definitely ratcheted down. I mean, we've talked about that. It's intentional. The next card that I wanted to talk about, and we covered this pre-pod, but it was at the addition of Fable Passage for thematic reasons exclusively. But it, as May had already told me, it was a price point situation that you wanted to keep this cube relative. So I hope they reprint that card, because I feel like on point, that is the story card for this cube, Fable Passage, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's not much more than that.
There's a lot of lands I'd like to put in specifically for the narrative that they provide, but I don't because price point. Fabled Passage is just, this is better than Evolving Wilds.
Right. And then we also talked about pre-pod, and we do this, Stu and I do this sometimes, and I'll add this to the recording, obviously, right? Is we kind of hash out some discussions to see how people who are either we're interviewing and or Stu and I's tempo might be on a conversation or attitude towards it, right?
Yeah.
But one of my personal observations, and I'll explain it, is the addition of the gain lands, the +1 life. And the reason why, and I'm using this experience based on I've curated and built and gifted to my younger brother Josh a Pauper Cube, and my buddy Chris Moore, who was on a previous episode, Sandwich. Also, we've cut these from the Pauper environment, and I do realize you're not a Pauper environment, but the gain lands in particular, what we observed, even though I know you're going to run one or twosies of them, that it makes it so that aggro is more challenged than aggro already is. But you're more of a mid-range-ish aggro, mid-rangey aggro.
Yeah, and I will say quickly, that was my rebuttal, was that aggro and getting the hyper-efficient, Goblin Guide Monastery Swift Spear, again, referencing the vintage environment, which a lot of people are going to be used to, you're not as concerned about that. That's not a theme or an aspect of this cube that you're really focusing on. It is more mid-rangey. It's not put 1s and 2s and swing sideways as quickly as possible. And that's why I felt that from every aspect, the budgetary aspect, even thematically, I think you're getting a life. It's land. It's it's fun. It's whimsical. The whole thing fits.
It makes more sense. I've been convinced since. Yeah, I'm not unreasonable. I see.
So I feel does that kind of track with the reason for your inclusion?
Yeah, you absolutely have it right, Stu.
Yeah,
that is precisely why the gain lands are in here. I want my aggro package to exist and do a specific role, but in order for aggro to push that extra mile, it has to push, claw, fight, and bite for that role.
Nice.
It has to push for it, which is why you see things like Skyship Stalker, why you see these 4-drops like Servok that comes down and puts down a clock. Things that can be part of your aggro packages in a way that still puts the game on a clock in a different kind of way.
Yeah, you're not just committing
the gain lands
obvious
are in here
resources.
not so that way I can completely just shut out aggro.
Yep.
It also what's the word I'm looking for?
Reinforces.
Adds to a lot of the life gain triggers. It slows down the game a bit. Mm-hmm. It makes it so that way things like the mill package is allowed to exist. It makes it so that way if you want to choose those fixing and you want to go into those 3 colors, because it's only 9% of the cube.
Okay.
If you want to go into those colors, you still have to have that top land. You have to play slower, which gives the aggro deck time for you to get in as much as they can. They have to claw and fight and punch for it.
Yeah, nice.
Okay.
So that kind of wraps up that portion. We've kind of covered the overview of the cube. May has some very specific questions. It's curator questions, etc. And she wanted to present them to myself and Stu. Yeah. And she's going to throw some curveballs. Go ahead.
So for time constraint purposes, this is going to be interesting. So do you feel like there's an innate struggle between cube design in terms of flavor versus function?
100%, yes. Flavor can come at a cost of function, and it's also hard to sometimes present because you have to have players that are willing to listen and understand the story that you're wanting to tell, i.e. my Femme Fatale cube, some of my cards by my own volition are restricted in their power levels because it must be a female in order to enter that environment, whether it be multi-species or what. But it does create like this problem where some of my friends in particular that play higher powered environments, they look at those cards and they say, why would you ever run this? Taking out of context the fact that it must fit these rules or the genre in which I've...
That's the point that I was going to make 100%. It is going to be down to the players that are putting themselves in the seat and picking up that pack and looking at those cards and appreciating why you have included them, right? I would consider myself pretty rational overall in life, maybe, question mark. Yes, there's going to be times where I'm looking purely at power level. If we're drafting the vintage cube, I'm looking at power level. But if I'm drafting something that I know is going to be focused more thematically on, archetypes, fun mechanics, that kind of stuff, then I'm going to start switching how I judge a card, right? I'm gonna start to maybe have a bit more fun.
The night that I rolled out my La Femme Fatale cube, I made a soundtrack. I mean, it was
Nice.
Gwen Stefani. It was girls.
It was pretty sweet.
I wanted to set the mood, right? Like I'm gonna rock
That's
this.
a pretty good mood.
Yeah. I want everybody to know what's up. All right. So, what was your next question?
Have you made any flavor breaks for the sake of function?
Yeah. I have. We were just talking about earlier. It was the in my horror cube. I've added a couple cards that maybe were more functional tools. It was the delirium person we were talking about earlier. The one drop.
Dragon Rage Shaman?
Dragon Rage Channeler.
All right. Yeah. For
Dragon
my
Rage
Dragon Rage,
Channeler.
yeah.
an example of that would be like in my horror cube, I added Dragon's Rage Chandler because she had delirium, and it was not on point with my vampires, werewolves, although human and shaman, all etc. I had to it wasn't really scary. I put it in there. Another example of that would be in my horror cube again. I broke the rules, and it's still on point whether or not I want to keep it or not. Is Thassa's Oracle? I made an alternate art in order to go in there because the other one was way too happy holding like a pearl or something. But this is I'm like in a Call of Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft type world, and yes, there could be merfolk, but she looked a little too sweet and a little too happy, and everything has to be dark and scary in that cube in order to get so that. Yes, I have broken those rules. I try to do it the least amount as possible, but thematic cubes, it's hard, right? I mean, it's
I've
it's
done
a
it
challenge.
once.
I don't like
Gary
it,
Salad.
and it makes you feel weird, doesn't it? I don't like it. Like you feel like they don't care. The Stews of the world, they don't care. They'll come and play it, and they're like, whatever.
Right.
But the curator's like, oh, man, I hope they don't notice that vampire's smiling. It's like that.
I'm not going to judge
No,
you
he
for
won't
having
care.
a smiling vampire
All right,
in your cube.
what was your next question?
What's the best way to eat a dragon egg?
Oh well, I mean, it depends. I like to poke a hole in one end and then blow through it to blow it out the other end, and then I make a nice.
I'm going to say in my upkeep.
Yeah, in my upkeep.
Is there another way?
There is no other way. During your upkeep. Was that at the beginning of your
I prefer
upkeep or
scrambled.
during? It's very specific now. We have to errata
At
that.
the beginning of.
The beginning of. All right, what else you got?
I feel like dragons should have payoffs, or are they the payoff?
I think dragons can be the payoff or are a value card depending on the power of the cube. And I will say this, and I will always reference Glorybringer is kind of my S tier,
Love
reference
Glorybringer.
point, right, for dragons.
One of my favorites.
And we have to
Absolutely.
use the old Gnawbone method in order to determine if this is a good card or not.
It's S tier.
Yeah, it's almost
the
like
old Norbones
or
of
less
the
than
old
that or
Norbones
something.
method, right? So Glorybringer is a payoff, right? But it's a different kind of payoff because of the environment that it exists in. The reason why I look at Glorybringer as a payoff is because it almost represents you should be cheering for yourself the fact that you got to the point where you're casting this card and you're not dead yet, because it's not a cheap card to cast, right? So
Right.
to me, it's a huge payoff. You've survived. You've put pressure on your opponent to get to that point where you're able to put into play a finisher. I don't want to have to do or don't need to have to do a whole lot after I've cast that card to threaten to win. If you haven't got to turn 4, turn 5 maybe with a mono red deck and if you're not threatening lethal at that point and Glorybringer's a game finisher, then you either haven't drafted a very good deck or you've just really been unlucky with Flood or Screw or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So that to me is sort of how I view Dragon.
What are your favorite adventure cards?
Bone Crusher Giant.
Tell us why Bone Crusher.
Oh, because you pay the adventure cost, enters the battlefield, does 2 damage to target permanent on the
I
battlefield,
think it's
and
more
then
than
it
that,
comes
isn't
in
it?
as a 4/3.
Is it 3?
Is it 3 or 2? I don't know. I don't have the card in front of me, but I like it because it has it's removal on a stick that goes on an adventure and then comes back in. And then also, I'm especially partial to
You get 1.
adventure cards
get 1.
because I run a EDH Tomebound deck where I do a lot of the adventures come back in and check the exile effects, so then I make treasures. So I just run them all. I love them all.
Cool. Petty Theft. Absolutely
Nice.
no.
Yeah, Petty
Not
Theft's
even
great.
no competition. Petty Theft.
Yeah, Bone Crusher kills Petty Theft, by the way, just when it comes in. Just want to point that out.
Kills what? I've already
Your fairy.
banched your merit wage token, man. Why are you worried? I ain't worried about you anymore.
And then mine is just Hypnotic Sprite, so
Yeah,
Okay,
Hypnotic Sprite's
tell-
fantastic.
Tell us why Hypnotic Sprite.
love it. So it is a blue flying 2/1. You can play its adventure for 2 and a blue to counter target spell that has a converted mana cost of 3 or less.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. I like the versatility in the adventure cards. I like that they give your players and curators options within their builds. That's why I like it. I'm willing to sacrifice raw power for some of these cards just to get modal spells. And I think I don't think that's a new idea. Everybody's kind of down for that at this point. We're a little tired of the on-rails cards at this point. You know, something enters the battlefield, does a thing, it's become a little stale. I think players are really in love with, I get to make 3 choices. 2 of them are really great. One's maybe a little bit lesser, maybe makes a treasure, but I'm willing to accept the choices, right? People don't, they want diversity in their choices, not to feel like they want to have agency within their draft.
And I will say maybe that, you know, we've talked about how much we all love drafting and playing Cube, right? Yep. Maybe this opens up a much greater point about Cube, curating, drafting, playing in general. Yep. The power level of Magic in general over the last few years has been completely nuts. If you're playing competitively, you're playing standard, you're playing modern, you're playing legacy, vintage, 60 card, constructed Magic, things have gone completely crazy. You talked about Ragavan and Urza Saga, and there's been bans and restricted cards in Vintage, Oko. Like, this is
definitely
a
crazy, conversation
for
time. Another episode.
It is. However, this is what is such a wonderful thing about specifically cubes that we're talking about right now. The Fae Cube, your cubes, Anthony, your Artifact Cube, Two-Headed Giant, the Femme Fatale, all that kind of stuff. You've now been able to construct an environment for your play group and anyone else who wants to, you know, download and copy and, you know, take your cube and bring it to life. You're now in a position where you can create this environment that has been able to separate itself from this ultra pushed power level environment that we're seeing more and more from, you know, just the organic sets that have been pushed out by Wizards of the Coast. And a lot of players are kind of craving that, right? And I don't really want to make a completely absurd or crazy reference, but I play a video game. It's called Escape from Tarkov. It's super crazy, like when it has these like cycles, as a lot of video games do. Everyone craves the time for like the first couple of weeks where everyone's back to like using real basic gear and there's no like super overpowered stuff. I kind of crave that when I'm playing Magic. I don't always want to play overpowered stuff. And I think that's what's so wonderful about cubes like this and the more thematic and customized cubes that's not just power, that you're giving people an opportunity to just play a much more simpler and almost, dare I say it, romantic kind of Magic where you know, you're doing some fun.
Yeah, the Island of Misfit Toys by May.
Exactly. How amazing is that? So shout out to, again, and I will say this, shout out to May for coming on with us today. This has been absolutely incredible for me. I've had maybe more fun than I've had in any other episode recording any of these podcasts.
Including Anthony, like you've just totally
You're
crushed
fired.
me. Yeah.
We're doing this from just a few hours from now on. And mate, please tell us where we can reach you because, you know, we want to give you a shout out, obviously, for this wonderful cube. Tell all the people that listen to this where they can reach you.
All right, you can reach me on Twitter at @Magic1. I couldn't get the domain for the just Magic, so just Magic1. You can also find me on YouTube under Magic and under Twitch under Myagic. It's MYAGIC.
Very
very cool. Well, we appreciate taking the time with us, and man, this cube is it's beautiful. If you get, I will put this up on all the socials. I'll include this in the show notes, etc., so everybody can check up this beautifully, just amazingly curated cube presented by May / She's gonna make me say it, Myagic. I think I got it right. It's like a cat saying magic. It's pretty great. And if you want to see how, if you want to see how splendidly that you can build a tribal curation deck without using the lords that we've overly accentuated in this and all the traps and stuff, follow this cube. It'll help you get the right way the first time, and it'll teach you how to play Magic the way that Dr. Richard Garfield intended, with the beautiful, beautiful Shivan dragons and Sarah angels that we all miss. All right. Other than that, May, I just want to say again, we really appreciate you having on the episode, taking the time with us. This has been, just as Stu said, this has been wonderful. And I love just exploring the conversation with another curator, getting feedback. And you and I feel like are very kindred in our design, so this is wonderful. Yeah. Other than that, Stu, you want to carry us to the socials?
As always, hit us up. We'll just give you the Twitter at MtgCubePod. Let us know how you feel about this episode as well as all the others. And as always, Please give us a 5-star review if you like the content. We really appreciate it, and we want to get the word out to all the MTG enthusiasts, as well as Cube enthusiasts, and whoever else might really get enjoyment out of listening to the podcast. And again, please go over and check out Myagic. Her Twitter feed is really fun. Lots of pick one, pack ones, amazing content, and I will say, we'll definitely have you back. Really exciting to continue some more collaboration. And as always...
Well, before we do it, I'm going to add one more piece. We've recently opened up a Patreon, and it's going to be... Yeah, so we got a Patreon at UberCube, and underneath said Patreon, we're going to have certain privileges that are going to be to include both Discord privileges, the ability to get involved with the content that we're developing here at UberCube, as well as voting, and the UberCube Clinic, which is, still working on that pretentious name, but all the same, we're trying to make it fun, we're trying to enjoy it, and we're also working on merch in progress. So just want to keep you guys tuned up on some news. And other than that, we just want to say, as always, happy cubing.
Happy cubing.